All right, so how do we learn? What are the basics?
Okay, so something I talk about in my book is an acronym I came up with, which is SAD, so SAAD. And the idea is like revision can be very sad. It can be kind of a miserable experience. So rather than it being sad, how can you turn it sad? And each of these things stand for a little hack based off the science of learning, where I've done loads of research into different academic papers and evidence-based techniques. I sort of boiled it down to four things that you can look at every way that you're revising to question yourself whether it's actually effective or not. And I don't know if you want me to run through what those are.
Yes, please.
I guess I've led a bit of mystery now. Yes, so the first one is S, which is spaced repetition. So this is the idea of the forgetting curve of human memory. So, how we learn is humans, we often like to sit there, we like to cram, think we're studying by revising for 10-hour blocks and then going away and not reviewing this information for a very long time. But that's not how human memory works. We start off at 100% of whatever we've learnt, and then it exponentially decreases. Human memory just absolutely decays over time. So you can imagine, you've had a class, you've had a new lesson on something in biology, and then 2 days later, you can't even remember a single thing you've just looked at. And then when you come to revise it again in a month, you're starting totally from scratch because you don't even remember what you first learnt. So the idea of spaced repetition is you can hack human memory by reviewing this information at regularly increasing intervals. So, for example, you have that day in your classroom where you've learned something new. Then the day after, you go back and you look at it. Then 3 days after, you go back and look at it. 5 days, 7 days, and you slowly increase that time. And all of a sudden, it's being put into your long-term memory. So that is the first S, is spaced repetition. And, that applies to any technique you're going to use, whether that's flashcards or even highlighting your notes. If you are going to be repeating it, it's going to go in a lot better than doing it once in a blue moon.
Do you know if that applies to physical skills as well?
I wouldn't be surprised if it does, but I don't have a lot of expertise on like muscle memory and that kind of thing. Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised because I guess it's still a facet of human learning.
Interesting. All right, what's the A?
Okay, so we've got two A's in here. We've got active recall. So this actually, I think, is one of the most important things that people should understand, because so much of how people often revise is passive. It's where you're looking at information and it makes you feel intelligent because, of course, everything you're looking at is right. You're looking at a diagram with everything already labeled for you and you're nodding away, feeling like you're putting it in your brain. You're flicking through that textbook, you're rereading your notes, you're spending hours rereading, and it just feels like you are full of information. But in reality, none of that is going in. And it's actually really counterintuitive how learning works. It's less about what you're putting in and breathing into your brain. It's more about what you're testing yourself on and what you're dragging out. And that is what active recall is. It's sitting down, asking yourself tough questions about the topic that you're trying to learn and trying to find the answers yourself. And if you can't find them, you can then look at them. And then the next day, you're going to ask yourself the questions again. So it's finding revision techniques which are, requiring that more active element.
That's something like active recall is something that I never knew was a thing when I was at uni. Bonkers.
It is bonkers, and it's crazy because even the aesthetic of studying, I feel, is highlighting. You have pastel highlighters, and you feel really good about it when you're going through. That's just you,
Jade. That's just you.
Oh, maybe that's just me in the aesthetic, like study Tumblr world, but. Yeah, there's something about highlighting information which makes you feel like you're doing something valuable. But when you look into the science of it, it doesn't actually do that much for you.
Yeah, it has to be repeated recall, not repeated exposure. Like, that's the difference between the two. And you're totally correct. As you look at something over and over again, you become more familiar with it. But familiarity and recall ability are not the same thing. But they can kind of like seem like they're the same thing. As you read a page and you go, oh yeah, that bit, the paragraph about the Berlin Wall or whatever it is that you're learning about, you know what's coming up, but you don't know it enough to be able to close the textbook and do it. So what's a good way for someone to do active recall just look at a question, close it, try and answer it?
So one of my favorite techniques, which I talk about in a different chapter of how to apply these methods, is called blurting. And
That's
the
a
idea
disgusting
is,
word.
It's a horrible name, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it's memorable.
I'm not going to forget that.
I was going to say, I've talked about this on my YouTube channel before, and I think it's the most popular revision method that's been discussed. I have people, even to this day, like messaging me being like, Jade, blurting has changed my life.
All right, well, let's hold on. Let's hold on to that. Let's finish off sad,
sure.
and then we'll get into that word that I really don't want to say.
So yeah, the other A is associations, which is the idea that whenever you're learning something new, if you can associate it to something you already know, the likelihood that you're going to remember it and that you're going to make sense of it is exponentially higher. So I use a non-study example, just to explain this to people, is how I'm often able to remember people's names quite well. If you think, you're at a party, you're going around, you're meeting so many new people, and when you hear someone's name, the odds are you've forgotten about it before they've even finished saying it. And the way that you can remember names more easily is when the second you hear their name, trying to associate it to something else that you know about either that name or the way that person looks or something about that word. And an example I give is, say someone is called Charlotte. That's a standard name, very easy to forget. But if in that 1 or 2 seconds you can think about a Charlotte that you know, maybe your neighbor's called Charlotte, and you're taking 1 second just to think, oh, this person doesn't really look like my neighbor Charlotte, or oh, I don't know, like just some element of the name that brings up an association or a memory, just means that the next time you see that person, you're bringing to mind this association that you've created for yourself, and you're more likely to bring that word, that name back. And the way that you can apply this to studying is, say you're learning something new in a classroom. When you're learning something, if you can instantly think, okay, how does this link to the last class I took? How does this link to a different topic or even a different subject? How does this work for a test question I've seen? And even just scribbling notes on the side, like, oh, I've seen something like this before, is really increasing the associations and the rate of retention that you'll have, because you're building on foundations of your existing knowledge.
All right, D,
desirable difficulty. So this is the idea that we don't really like to challenge ourselves naturally. You're always going to reach for what feels easy. And so that means if a subject, you're really good at it, you're more likely to go back and study it than that subject that you really hate. So it's constantly questioning, does this feel really easy for me right now? And if it does, how can I make it harder? So maybe you're looking at a flashcard set and it's just got quite easy for you. Then it's time to move on to test questions or practice papers or something that while you're doing it feels like a challenge. And that's how you know that you're spending your time well.
Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. It makes me very happy indeed. Peace.